We all think we understand melting. I mean, it's one of those things you learn about in elementary school.
Right. Ice to water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or, a metal gets super hot until it suddenly becomes molten lava. When a three-dimensional solid changes phase like that,
Yep.
it's abrupt.
It's a discontinuous shift.
Yeah, the material is either a solid or it's a liquid. There is no subtle, half-baked in-between stage.
And that abruptness, that's what physicists call a first-order transition. The crystal structure, that perfect lattice, it completely and instantly vanishes at a very precise temperature.
It's the ultimate all-or-nothing scenario.
It really is.
But
Yeah.
what if I told you that in the microscopic world of ultra-thin, two-dimensional materials, the world of flatland melting might not be a two-step process, but a three-step journey? What if there was a structural halfway house, this intermediate phase, where a material manages to lose its physical structure but somehow keeps its organized sense of direction?
That structural halfway house is a real thing. It's known as the Hexatic phase. And for decades, actually observing it in the toughest, most rigidly structured materials, we're talking those held together by strong chemical bonds, that has been one of the holy grails of condensed matter physics.
The theory was there, but nobody could quite nail it down.
The direct experimental proof was just elusive.
And that is exactly what we're diving into today. We're unpacking some truly revolutionary work that provides the first definitive evidence of this state in a robust, covalently bonded material.
Right. This is a paper titled Hexatic Phase in Covalent Two-Dimensional Silver Iodide. And it was published in the journal Science Advances.
A huge deal in the field.
Oh, absolutely. And it was a critical international collaboration. The research was led by a team including lead authors Thuyan Bui, David Lamprecht, and Jacob Manson, with corresponding author Kimmo Mustonen.
And they're from all over, right?
Yep. Hailing from institutions like the University of Vienna, TU Wien, and the University of Silesia in Katowice.
So our mission today is to break down the physics behind this hexatic phase, explain why finding it in a covalently bonded crystal matters so much, and what this tells all of us about the fundamental rules of the universe when things get impossibly thin.
Get ready, because the physics of flatland is far stranger than our 3D world.
So to get the strangeness, where do we start?
We have to start with that fundamental difference between 3D and 2D physics. As you said, in 3D, melting is first order. Everything is gone at once. But when you thin a material down to an atomically thin sheet, just 2 dimensions, well, that changes the rules of the game entirely.
We're talking quantum scale here, right? Like
Yeah.
a single sheet of paper, but made of atoms.
Exactly. And here, a towering theoretical framework comes into play. It's called the Kosterlitz, Thouless, Halperin, and Nelson-Young theory.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
That is, yeah. So everyone just calls it the KTHNY theory.
KTHNY, got it.
And this theory, which is a classic in statistical mechanics, it basically proposes that 2D melting cannot happen in one abrupt jump. Instead, it says it has to happen in 2 separate, gradual or continuous steps.
So the transition from solid to liquid gets interrupted by this intermediate phase.
That's right. Step 1 is the transition from a solid to the hexatic phase. This is where the material loses one type of order. And then step 2 is the transition from that hexatic phase to the fully liquid state, where it loses the second type of order.
Okay, let's make this stick. We need an analogy. Imagine a highly structured crowd, maybe a marching band in a parade.
Perfect. So in the solid state, every musician is standing in perfectly measured rows and columns. That's translational order.
Their location is perfect.
And every single person is facing the exact same direction, straight ahead. That's orientational order. So they have perfect order in both location and alignment.
Now, in a fully liquid state, say a mosh pit at a concert, everyone's scattered randomly, bumping into each other, facing every which way.
Total chaos. Both translational and orientational order are gone.
So where does the hexatic phase fit in?
The hexatic phase is that amazing organized liquid in the middle. According to KTHNY, in that first step, from solid to hexatic, the marching band breaks rank. The perfect rows and columns disappear.
So the musicians are just wandering around the field now.
They are. That is the complete loss of translational order.
But, and this has to be the key, they're all still facing the exact same direction.
Precisely. They maintain that orientational order, even though their specific placement is totally gone. It's an ordered, liquid-like state, a fluid that somehow still remembers its direction.
And the KTHNY theory expects both of these steps, from solid to hexatic and then hexatic to liquid, to be gradual and continuous.
That's the core idea.
Rah.
But there is a competing idea, what's called the mixed melting scenario.
Okay, what does that one say?
It agrees on the first step. Solid to hexatic is continuous and smooth, but it says the final step from hexatic to liquid is actually first order.
So it's abrupt.
It's abrupt, fast, and it involves two distinct phases coexisting at the final melting point, much more like our familiar 3D melting.
So the big scientific puzzle is, does flatland follow the smooth two-step KTH&Y rulebook, or this mixed rulebook, which is one smooth step and one final sharp drop-off?
And that brings us to the just immense challenge of this experiment. I mean, before this work, scientists had seen hints of the hexatic phase, but only in extremely weak systems.
Like what?
Things like layers of soap on water or magnetic colloids suspended in the liquid. These materials are held together by really weak forces, so they're easy to manipulate and melt gently.
But this research team was aiming for the big leagues. Materials held together by strong covalent bonds. Why is that so much harder?
Covalent bonds are the workhorse bonds in nature. They're what hold together a diamond or quartz. They're highly directional, incredibly strong, and they resist structural change fiercely.
So you need a lot more energy.
A lot more energy, and you need incredible stability to catch that subtle, intermediate hexatic phase.
So they picked silver iodide, AgI. It's known for its hexagonal covalently bound structure. But if you just heat up a 2D sheet of it, wouldn't it just instantly crumple into its 3D form?
It absolutely would. The moment you thin a material, it wants to minimize its surface energy, which means changing its structure. So to prevent this, the research team had to do something pretty remarkable.
What was that?
They encapsulated the single atomic layer of silver iodide in multi-layer graphene.
Whoa! So they made a microscopic sandwich.
That's a perfect way to put it. The graphene confinement acted like a pressure cooker, or like you said before, a force field.
Right.
It applied this uniform force that held the AgI monolayer perfectly flat and stopped it from turning into its 3D bulk phase.
So they could study its melting dynamics in total isolation.
Exactly. And the results of this stabilization are just staggering.
Tell me.
Bulk, three-dimensional silver iodide melts at around 660 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
The graphene encapsulation made these 2D crystals so robust that the largest ones resisted melting until temperatures were substantially higher, around 1200 degrees Celsius.
Wow, that's almost double. That really underscores the extremity of the conditions they were working with.
And the incredible stabilizing power of 2D confinement.
So now they have this atomic sheet sealed inside a carbon sandwich, glowing hot at over 1,000 degrees. How in the world do you actually see the atoms moving and shifting?
With a battery of very high-tech tools, specifically something called time and temperature resolved in situ atomic resolution scanning transmission electron microscopy, or STEM.
STEM, okay.
And that was coupled with nanobeam electron diffraction, or NBE.
All right, let's unpack those. What did the STEM do and what did the NDAD do?
So STEM gives you the literal atomic map. You can track the position of every single atom. But the NBD, that's the critical tool for the phase analysis.
Yeah.
It tracks the symmetry and order of the structure.
So it's not just where the atoms are, but how they're collectively aligned.
That's it. By watching the electron diffraction pattern, they could tell if the material was perfectly hexagonal, which means solid.
Or slightly hexagonal.
Which would be hexatic, or totally scrambled, which means liquid.
That level of microscopic resolution, tracking individual atoms while they're being roasted at 1,200 degrees, is just phenomenal. So what did they see? Did the melting process match the theory?
It did. They observed two distinct sequential stages of disorder. In stage 1, that's between about 1,000 and 1,125 degrees Celsius, the material became incredibly dynamic. You could see little regions of disorder just appearing and disappearing constantly.
So it was fluctuating, like vibrating on the edge of breaking apart.
Exactly. And then stage 2 was the final melt, between the 1050 and 1,200 degrees, where all the crystalline structure just vanished completely.
Okay, so they saw an intermediate phase. But to prove it was the theoretical hexatic phase, they had to go beyond just looking. They needed mathematical proof.
That's right. They had to test our dancer's analogy with hard data. They tested the two core metrics, translational order and orientational order, using what are called correlation functions.
Which basically measure how far out the order extends in the material.
Yes. So let's start with the translational correlation. This measures the physical spacing of the atoms. They found that in this intermediate phase, the translational correlation function decayed exponentially.
Exponential decay. So that's like a cell phone signal just dropping off a cliff the second you pass the tower.
That's a great way to think about it. It's a fast drop. It confirms a very short-range structure. It proves that the perfect crystalline rows and columns were quickly scrambled.
So translational order was definitely gone, but the second metric, the orientational correlation, that's where the hexatic phase really lives or dies.
And this is where it gets really interesting. They found that the orientational correlation, the hexagonal alignment, our dancers all facing the same direction, it decayed slowly. It followed a power law decay.
What's the real-world difference between exponential and power law decay?
Imagine sending a signal out. Exponential decay means the signal dies out very quickly, but power law decay means the signal weakens slowly, but it can still be detected across a very, very long distance.
So for the silver iodide, this meant that even while the atoms were physically wandering all over the place,
Their alignment, their direction, was maintained over vast distances across the crystal.
so the atoms were wandering randomly, but they still had a shared long-range direction. That is the definitive scientific signature of the hexatic phase.
That's the one. Short-range translational order, but long-range orientational order. And the analysis confirmed this phase consistently existed within a very narrow window, from about 1125 to 1145 degrees Celsius.
And that's monumental.
It is. It's the first time this exact signature has been observed in a material with such high-energy covalent bonds. It really validates the KTHNY predictions for these strong 2D systems.
Okay, so we've confirmed the hexatic phase exists. Now for the final showdown, KTHNY versus the mixed melting scenario. We know solid to hexatic was continuous. But how did it go from hexatic to liquid?
To figure that out, you have to look for coexistence. A continuous transition means the entire material transforms uniformly, gradually. But a first-order transition means two distinct phases, hexatic and liquid, suddenly appear and compete for space side by side.
And they could measure that by looking at the local density distribution of the particles.
Yes. They essentially mapped the particle density across the material and plotted it on a histogram. If the transition is continuous, you should see a unimodal distribution.
Meaning one peak.
One single peak that just gradually shifts. Imagine a graph with one smooth hill that just moves from left to right. And that's what they saw during the solid to hexatic transition.
But once the temperature hit that final melting range from hexatic to liquid, the plot changed.
It did. Starting around 1135 degrees Celsius, the density distribution became increasingly bimodal.
Bimodal, it developed two distinct peaks.
Exactly. Think of that graph now having two separate hills.
That's the key. If you have two peaks, it means you have two distinct, stable environments coexisting in the material at the same temperature.
Like having both water and ice present simultaneously in a glass. The bimodal distribution is the smoking gun for a first-order transition. It proves that hexatic regions and fully liquid regions were competing and coexisting.
So the verdict is in.
The verdict is in. The team concluded that 2D silver iodide follows the mixed melting pathway. A smooth, continuous transition to the hexatic phase, followed by a sudden first-order transition into the fully liquid state.
And they didn't stop there, right? They connected this mechanical proof back to the actual physical reason for it, the defects in the structure.
In the original KTHNY theory, the melting is driven by the uniform creation of these isolated high-energy defects. They gradually weaken the lattice across the whole material, leading to a smooth transition.
But that's not what they saw in the silver iodide.
No. They saw a very high density of lower energy defects that rapidly clustered together. Instead of being isolated points of weakness, these defects formed massive, line-like clusters.
So they formed borders.
They formed sharp physical borders, what are called grain boundaries, between the highly ordered hexatic phase and the fully disordered liquid phase.
And those grain boundaries are what created the sharp division that drove the abrupt first-order transition. It all links together.
It's a beautifully complete piece of science. They not only observed the long-sought hexatic phase in a high-energy covalent crystal, but they used the atomic movement to definitively settle the debate between the two competing 2D melting theories for this type of material.
That is just phenomenal work. It moves a concept from a theoretical curiosity to confirmed atomic-level physics. So for the listener, what are the key takeaways from all this?
Okay, key takeaway 1. Melting in atomically thin materials follows rules that are fundamentally different from 3D melting. This research confirms that the stable, long-range ordered hexatic phase exists, and it's achievable even in strong, covalently bonded materials. It's not just for Went systems anymore.
And key takeaway 2.
For this specific high-strength material, the final step into the liquid state is abrupt. It's a first-order transition, which validates the mixed melting scenario. And we know why. The defects cluster together to form grain boundaries, physically separating the two coexisting phases.
And what's the big picture significance?
It's all about technology. If we're going to engineer the next generation of 2D material tech, from faster atomic scale electronics to tiny stable sensors, we need a complete stability map. We need to know exactly how these structures fall apart under extreme conditions, like 1200 degrees Celsius.
This research provides the crucial blueprints for material stability under stress.
It really does.
Absolutely essential knowledge for our future flatland engineers. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the microscopic world of two-dimensional phase changes.
We'll leave you with this final provocative thought. If the fundamental rules governing something as simple as melting change completely when a material is only one atom thick, what other physical laws that we consider absolute might break down entirely when we start manipulating matter in other exotic, ultra-small dimensions or environments?
Something to ponder. We'll see you next time.